If you've decided to start supplementing with Betaine HCL capsules to improve the acidity in your stomach and help you acidify that food correctly so that you can really break it down and get the nutrients out of that food, most people that are experiencing digestive symptoms that can come from low stomach acid or hypochlorhydria are usually just going to experience improvement to those symptoms the more they're using the Betaine HCL capsules. But there are some individuals that can experience some symptoms when they first start using HCL. And some of the symptoms can be like, well, that just made me feel worse. That's not right for me. I'm not going to use that anymore. But a lot of these folks that experience the magnification of symptoms are often the people that need to acidify their stomach the most. And they just don't understand the steps they can take to get past those discomforts. So in this video, I'm going to help you understand what things to look out for and the steps you can take to get past those troubles if they show up. You don't want to miss this.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
Now in the description below, I'm going to link this study here that looked at mealtime supplementation with Betaine HCL for functional hypochlorhydria, and that's just low stomach acid. And the functional part was they were just giving the people in this study PPIs to turn off their stomach acid and then supplementing with Betaine HCL during the meals to see if that would improve issues that can come from that low stomach acid. And what they found was, they said, furthermore, these data strongly suggest that supplemental mealtime Betaine HCL may be safe and appropriate and necessary in subjects on PPI therapy in order to decrease common PPI side effects like protein, micronutrient, and drug malabsorption, foodborne microbial survival, or slow gastric emptying. And so basically they're saying that they were using this Betaine HCL to fix the low stomach acid that they created by using PPIs. But we also need to understand that a lot of people have low stomach acid that are not using PPIs. There's a lot of reasons that can restrict the body's ability to create enough stomach acid, so they can have low stomach acid even without using a medication that's intended to turn off that stomach acid. Just keep in mind that when we're talking about how to use this HCL, I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving you medical advice, and if you're working with a healthcare practitioner, you would want to follow the steps they gave you because they might understand your specific situation better than I would. I don't know your situation, I'm just talking to a camera, I'm here by myself, I think. So you understand all that. But when we're looking at supplementing with Betaine HCL to acidify the stomach, basically the opinions are that the stomach makes about 2,500 milligrams worth of HCL per meal, like the equivalent of 2,500 milligrams of supplemented Betaine HCL is about what the stomach would make if the stomach was working appropriately. So some people may need to work, if they're using a supplement that maybe it has like 500 milligrams per capsule or something like that, they might need to work up to 5 capsules to equal that 2,500 milligrams. But most people when they start are just going to start up with 1 capsule because you don't know how much your stomach is already making. You might only need a little bit of a boost. It may be making some HCL already. And when you're picking out an HCL, we like to use HCL without pepsin. Most HCLs that you buy in the store are going to have pepsin, and there's nothing wrong with pepsin. Pepsin does aid in the digestion of protein and really helps us break down our food. But if a person's going to work up to 5 of those capsules per meal, I'm not telling you to do that, but a lot of people do that, and when they do that, too much of that pepsin can create some discomfort. So we tend to like to see people use HCL that does not contain pepsin, so they're not creating that discomfort. Now, the first thing that can come about when somebody starts to supplement with HCL is if they're dealing with a bacterial overgrowth. A lot of times the waste product from that bacteria can be very alkaline. So this stomach environment may be very alkaline from all that alkaline waste that a bacterial overgrowth is creating. So now a person dumps this acid in there and you get this acid product meeting an alkaline product in the stomach where it shouldn't be doing that. And that can create like this fizzy mess that creates all these gases and pressure and can create a lot of discomfort. The acid from the stomach, when it leaves down here, should meet this alkaline bile from the gallbladder and some bicarb from the pancreas, and that alkalinity should create a sizzle here in the duodenum, But that shouldn't happen in the stomach. And if it's happening there because of the alkaline waste from bacteria, it can create a lot of discomfort. It can create magnified bloating. It can make somebody really feel nauseous. And they'll be like, ah, man, this HCl is the worst. I feel horrible. But it's really because the stomach is way too alkaline. And when someone's not making enough HCl in their stomach, the odds of that bacterial overgrowth go way up. Because the acid is not just there to help us digest our food, it's the barrier to the whole digestive tract. So when these varmints come in on the food that we're eating, and they're coming in on the food that we're eating, they're supposed to die in that acid bath. But if a person's not making enough HCl, then the varmints come in and they set up camp and like, this is nice, let's have a keg party here. And they can really thrive in that alkaline environment, and then their waste makes that environment even more alkaline. And then those bad guys can also come down here in the small intestine and create like a SIBO, or a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth issue. So that can be one problem that can come from not having enough stomach acid, and if that overgrowth is there, adding the HCl in there can create some discomfort. So we like to see people, if they feel like there could be an overgrowth there, take steps to kind of reduce that overgrowth a little bit before they start supplementing with HCl. And we use steps like D-limonene, it's an orange peel extract, and or mastic gum, or maybe drinking some celery juice. There's lots of things that people use to kind of reduce bacteria in either the stomach or the small intestine. And we'll put links in the description below on videos on these issues here, so you can learn how to use those the correct way. But if a person can take steps to reduce that overgrowth, then that really reduces the chances of the HCl creating any kind of discomfort when they first start using it. And the next thing to think about is that a person could experience some magnified acid reflux. And people will, maybe they don't have reflux and they'll take some HCl and then they'll get some heartburn or reflux and they're like, oh man, this gives me heartburn, this gives me reflux. But advertisers kind of like us to think that this reflux is caused by having too much stomach acid, so they think, oh, I'm adding more acid and that gives me reflux, so I have too much, I should stop doing that. But acid reflux in most cases is really caused by not having enough stomach acid. There's this valve at the bottom of the esophagus called the lower esophageal sphincter that when food comes in, it closes so that that acid doesn't come back up and burn us. The problem is that valve is triggered by stomach acid. So if a person's not making enough stomach acid, that valve won't close, and then the small amount of acid they do have will come back up and burn them and cause them to have reflux. But if a person can acidify the stomach correctly, then it triggers that valve to close, and then the reflux goes away. If this is new information for you, we'll put a link in the description below for a video on why do I have acid reflux, and you can dig into that a little bit deeper. I'm not going to cover all of that here since we've covered that in other videos. But if a person does have all this bacteria, or their stomach is really overly alkaline because there's not enough stomach acid, and they add like 1 capsule of Betaine HCl, well, that's just a small amount. That probably isn't enough to really acidify the stomach enough to trigger that LES valve to close. But now they're getting reflux that contains acid. They added acid in there. So they're like, oh man, this makes me worse. The reality was they just needed to add more acid or reduce this overgrowth enough so that it's not so alkaline in the stomach, and all that alkaline waste isn't neutralizing the acid that your stomach may be making, or neutralizing the acid that you're adding into the stomach using the supplementation of the HCl. So if a person does experience some reflux or magnified reflux when they first start HCl, this is the first step, is to reduce any overgrowth, because that overgrowth has the ability to create more gases and more pressure to push things up. And then another step they could do is they might be able to just take like a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, and as that goes past the esophagus, the acidity of that vinegar may be enough to trigger that valve to close and correct the reflux during that meal. And then the next meal that they tested out, maybe they increase that HCl dose so that they're acidifying the stomach more in an effort to acidify it enough to trigger that valve to close. Some people might also have success putting like a little bit of just unrefined salt on their tongue, like an unrefined salt or an unrefined sea salt. And sometimes those minerals going down past the esophagus have the ability to kind of tighten up that LES valve a little bit and help it close a little bit more. Some people will find success with that. And when a person's first starting HCl, we find it best that if they avoid carbs or high starch or sugar meals, or even moderate starch or moderate sugar meals while they're starting that HCl. Because if there's an overgrowth in that stomach, a lot of times those sugars or carbs can really feed and kind of activate those bacteria. And when they activate more, they create more gases and more pressure. And that can increase the odds of creating a reflux issue because you kind of activated all those bacteria in there. So maybe if a person just does like protein and maybe some low carb green vegetables or something and some dietary fats, that might be a better option when first starting out. Now, once a person's got up to the full dose that they feel like they're getting enough and that they're acidifying their food, then they can test out putting carbs back in the meal, and it's probably going to be fine. It's not going to be a problem with the HCl as long as your stomach is acidified enough to trigger that valve to close. Does that make sense? Sometimes when I say that, people are afraid to eat carbs at all with HCl. It's totally fine as long as its stomach is acidifying enough that the carbs are not going to magnify some type of reflux issue. The next thing that could happen is adding more stomach acid here has the ability to create some loose stool issues if a person does not have their bile flowing correctly. So once this food is acidified correctly, it leaves the stomach and comes down here into the duodenum. And that acidity going into the duodenum triggers the gallbladder to squirt this alkaline bile down to help neutralize those acids. And some bicarb comes out of the pancreas to help neutralize acids a little bit too, but the bile in the gallbladder is really the big player there. And it's very common for someone's bile today to become too thick and sticky to flow correctly. And then it's not coming down and helping us neutralize the acids leaving the stomach. So it might not be creating any trouble with the poor bile flow if they also don't have any stomach acid. If there's not a lot of acid coming down there, nothing really has to be neutralized. There's no acid that needs to be neutralized. They're not digesting their food correctly. They're not breaking it down because there's not enough stomach acid, but they also don't have loose stool issues. So if the bile's not flowing, they may start acidifying that food correctly, yay! But if there's no bile to neutralize it, all of a sudden I got diarrhea that's lifting me off the toilet like a rocket. Well, that's not fun. I didn't sign up for that. Why would I want that? But it's not really a problem of HCl causes diarrhea. If that was the case, every human would have diarrhea that had their body working correctly, because every body that is working correctly is making stomach acid when they eat food. So that's not really the problem. The problem is there's a lack of bile flow. So a person might need to take steps to improve this bile flow, and they might need to hold off on supplementing with the HCl until they take enough steps to thin out the bile so the bile can flow correctly and help neutralize those acids. And if a person has lost their gallbladder, they may still have bile coming down from the liver through this biliary pathway into the duodenum kind of all the time, just kind of trickling in there. But it may not be enough of a bolus to really neutralize the acids that are leaving the stomach. So they may need to supplement with some ox bile or something. And we'll put a link in the description below for our video on 6 steps if you've lost your gallbladder, and that can help you understand what you might need to do if you're needing to supplement with some HCl to help acidify your stomach correctly. So if using HCl kind of loosens up that stool too much, then you might know that, hey, I really need to take steps to get my bile flowing better, and I'll point you to some steps you can do with that in just a minute. Now, the next thing to think about is some duodenal troubles, because when this acid leaves the stomach, it's supposed to be neutralized by that bile, but if it's not neutralized, then these acids continue through this intestinal tract. That's why the body's kind of bringing all this water there to cool it off and rush it out the back door. That's why we get that diarrhea if these acids are not being neutralized. That's one possible reason for diarrhea. It's not the only one. But that's kind of why we really want to make sure this bile is flowing correctly, because if not, you can also irritate the lower part of the duodenum, because that's not really meant to hit those acids and keep those acids there all the time. They're supposed to be neutralized by other things happening. And if that's not happening, if bile's not flowing correctly, it could even create irritation to the duodenum or even like a duodenal ulcer. And we've never heard from a client that's like, oh, I created a duodenal ulcer by using HCl. But when you understand how the body works, why take the chance of doing that? So we like to see people take steps to thin out their bile and make sure it's flowing, or supplementing with ox bile if they've lost their gallbladder, if they're going to supplement with HCl. We just feel like that's an important thing to do. And another possibility is that a person could be dealing with some type of gastritis issue or inflammation in the stomach. And if they have a lot of inflammation in the stomach and they add HCl into the stomach, that can create a lot of irritation. That can create almost like a burning sensation even. And what a person might need to figure out is, oh, I'm having discomfort when I add this HCl, but is that discomfort coming from this mixture of alkaline waste from bacteria kind of creating that fizzy mess? Or is this feel like I have like open wounds in my stomach lining and there's not a proper stomach lining there and I'm dealing with gastritis and it's creating that kind of burning feeling? Now that's something that you would not want to take HCl when you're doing that. You would want to take steps to improve that gastritis before you started supplementing with HCl. And we'll put a link in the description below for our video how to improve gastritis. And we talk in there about things you could do like drinking some cabbage juice for a few weeks. That has the ability to really improve some of that inflammation. But you also hear from people that are like, oh man, I took an HCl capsule and it gave me gastritis. Well, that's not really how it works. You can't get gastritis by just adding a little more acid one time. But if a person already had that problem, they might not really be feeling that problem if the body is not making enough hydrochloric acid for them to feel it. So they put it in there and like, oh man, now I feel it. This is a really big problem. But actually the gastritis issue is usually caused by not having enough stomach acid in there and some type of bacterial overgrowth that creates that inflammation and all of that trouble. And you can learn more about that if you watch that gastritis video below. But you can see there are some complications that can come about. For most people, if they do have complications, it's almost always because of some type of bacterial overgrowth that needs to be taken down, and then all of a sudden those discomforts don't show up, or they need to improve bile flow before they start to improve this stomach acid issue so that they have something to neutralize the acids once they leave the stomach. So if you're new to our channel and you don't already know how to make sure bile is flowing correctly, you can jump over right now and check out our video on 5 steps to improve bile flow, and that'll give you more insights into how to make sure that's working correctly. I can't wait to hear about your results.